Welcome to the Office on Violence Against Women, also referred to as OVW, pre-application information session for the fiscal year 2020 Rural Domestic Violence, Dating Violence, Sexual Assault, and Stalking Program Solicitation. This information session is being presented by OVW Rural Team Member Sue Puglisi and is meant to serve as a source of information regarding the rural application. It is strongly recommended that you read the full solicitation prior to listening to this information session. Although I will not review every page and section of the solicitation, I will highlight the Rural Program grant and application requirements. Deadlines, application submissions, and times. Application submissions and times are mentioned on the cover of the rural solicitation and also on pages 19 through 22. Applications are due by 11:59 p.m. Eastern Time on January 27, 2020. All applications are submitted through grants.gov. Program description. The Rural Program was authorized in the Violence Against Women Reauthorization Act of 2013. The Rural Program supports efforts to enhance the safety of rural victims of domestic violence, dating violence, sexual assault, and stalking, and supports projects uniquely designed to address and prevent these crimes in rural areas. Purpose areas. The Rural Program has 3 purpose areas. I won't read the purpose areas to you verbatim. However, in a nutshell, all projects funded through the Rural Program must fall under one or more of these purpose areas. Strategies. In addition to the 3 purpose areas, Rural Program grantees must implement one or more of the 5 strategies as outlined in the authorizing statute. This information can be found on page 2 of the solicitation. OVW priority areas. In FY 2020, OVW is interested in supporting the 3 priority areas identified below. Applications proposing activities in the following areas will be given special consideration. Information on how to address the OVW priority areas can be found on page 3 of the solicitation. Applicants are not required to address the 3 OVW priority areas. Statutory priorities. VAWA requires that OVW award 25% of appropriated rural program funds to meaningfully address sexual assault in rural communities. Applicants are not required to address sexual assault within their individual applications. However, interested applicants will be asked to identify the percentage of their project that addresses sexual assault. OVW will give priority to projects that meet the needs of underserved populations. Activities that compromise victim safety and recovery or undermine offender accountability. The solicitation companion guide lists specific activities that compromise victim safety and recovery or undermine offender accountability. Applications that propose any such activities may receive a deduction in points during the review process or may be eliminated from consideration entirely. Information on activities that compromise victim safety and recovery can be found on page 17 in the Solicitation Companion Guide that's located on the OVW website under Resources for Applicants. Out-of-scope activities. The solicitation lists specific activities that are outside the scope of the rural program and will not be supported by the program's funding. Applications that propose activities that are deemed to be substantially out of scope may receive a deduction in points during the review process or may be eliminated from consideration entirely. Budgets and award periods. The grant award period is for 36 months. Generally, the award period will start on October 1st, 2020. Continuation applications are limited to $750,000 for the entire 36 months. New applications are limited to $500,000 for the entire 36 months. Note that OVW has the discretion to make awards for greater or lesser amounts than requested and to negotiate the scope of work and budget with applicants prior to making an award. Types of applications. In FY 2020, OVW will accept applications for this program from the following. New applicants are those that have never received funding under the rural program or whose previous funding expired more than 12 months ago. Continuation applicants are those that have an existing or recently closed within the last 12 months, award under this program, and/or an applicant that received funding under this program in FY 16 or earlier that does not qualify as a new applicant. Please note that grant recipients that receive funding under the rural program in FY 2019 are not eligible to apply. Additionally, current grantees with a substantial amount of unobligated funds remaining 50% or more of their previous award as of March 31st, 2020, without adequate justification may not be considered for funding or may receive a reduced award amount if selected for funding in FY 2020. Eligibility. Eligible applicants are limited to states and territories, Indian tribes, local governments, nonprofit, public or private entities, including tribal nonprofit organizations in the United States or U.S. territories, faith-based and community organizations that meet the eligibility requirements. For definitions of these entities, please refer to pages 6 through 7 of the solicitation. I did want to note that we have received lots of questions from potential hospital and university applicants on whether or not they are eligible to apply for the rural solicitation. The answer is yes, and you would be considered a nonprofit, whether public or private entity. Also, when reading the footnote at the bottom of page 6, where it references the states that have been designated as rural based on the definition of rural state and the 2010 census, if you do not see your state listed, it does not mean you cannot apply. Regardless of whether an application is submitted by an entity from a rural state or a non-rural state, all applicants must target services in a rural area or community. The term rural state means a state that has a population density of 57 or fewer persons per square mile, or a state in which the largest county has fewer than 250,000 people, based on the most recent decennial census. Delivery of legal assistance certification. In previous years, legal assistance was limited to legal assistance in seeking protection orders and limited immigration matters. With the implementation of VAWA 2013, legal services have been expanded to include comprehensive legal service such as divorce, custody, and child support. All applicants proposing to provide legal assistance with funds under the FY 2020 Rural Program must certify in writing the requirements that are noted on pages 7 through 8 of the Rural Solicitation. Certifications must take the form of a letter on letterhead signed and dated by the authorized representative. Failure to provide the required certifications may disqualify an application from further consideration. At a minimum, an application missing the required certification letter will be required to submit a certification letter prior to receiving an award. A sample certification letter can be found on the OBW website via a link on page 7 of the rural solicitation under this section. Eligible service area documentation. As I stated previously, the rural statute within the Violence Against Women Act requires that rural funds are directed to victims residing within the areas that are rural eligible. To demonstrate that the areas that your agency is proposing targeting services to are rural eligible, every application other than those submitted by federally recognized Indian tribes, which are statutorily defined as rural, must include the proper printed documentation demonstrating that the proposed service areas meets this eligibility requirement. Instructions to complete the documentation process, meaning the rural eligibility documentation process, can be found via the link provided in the rural solicitation on page 8. The rural program does not require a map of your service area, only the documentation that's noted on page 8 of the solicitation. Required partnerships. All eligible applications must include a victim service provider as a formal project partner and/or the lead applicant as demonstrated through the required Memorandum of Understanding, or MOU, or letters of support, which applies for state, tribal, territory, or local court applicants only if applicable. A complete overview of the criteria used to determine a victim service provider can be found on pages 8 through 9 of the solicitation in this section. Additionally, eligible applications, including those submitted by a victim service provider, must include at least one project partner and must include agencies and organizations necessary to implement the proposed project. DOJ has implemented a new policy related to grantees that will potentially have staff and volunteers interacting with any participating minor in the course of activities under the award. This requirement will be applied to all OBW award recipients as a special condition. The recipient and any subrecipient at any tier may not permit any covered individual to interact with any participating minor in the course of activities under the award unless the recipient or subrecipient first has made a written determination of the suitability of that individual to interact with participating minors based on current and appropriate information. More information about this award special condition can be found on the OBW website included in this presentation. Application and submission information. Letter of intent. Applicants intending to apply for FY 2020 funding under this program are strongly encouraged to submit a letter of intent by January 13, 2020. The letter should be submitted to OBW at obw.rural@usdoj.gov. The letter should state that the applicant is registered and current with SAM and with grants.gov. This letter will not obligate the applicant to submit an application. Formatting and technical requirements. Applications must follow the formatting and technical requirements outlined in the solicitation. Points may be deducted for applications that do not adhere to the formatting and technical requirements. A complete listing of these requirements can be found on pages 9 through 10 of the solicitation. Application contents. Applications must include the following required documents and demonstrate that the program eligibility requirements have been met. The project narrative, budget detail worksheet and narrative, memorandum of understanding or MOU, letters of support which applies for state, tribal, territorial, or local court applicants only if applicable, and the eligible service area documentation. OVW will not contact applicants for these missing items. Applications that do not include all of these documents will be considered substantially incomplete and will not be considered for funding. In addition, the following documents are required, and failure to submit them will not result in removal from consideration, but may result in a loss of points. The summary data sheet and the proposal abstract. Applications must follow the formatting and technical requirements that are outlined in the solicitation. Accessibility. Applicants must include funds or describe other resources available to the applicant to support activities to ensure access for individuals with disabilities, deaf, hard of hearing individuals, and persons with limited English proficiency. The next couple of slides are going to focus on aspects of your application that relate to the documents that our financial team, the Grants Financial Management Division, or GFMD, reviews. More specifically, they will discuss some items that GFMD has identified from prior applications that could help with expediting your review process, our review process. Now I'm going to turn the presentation over to Suhaila Lasky.
So for today, we're going to highlight certain aspects of the pre-award risk assessment and provide you a link to a detailed webinar on how to develop the budget that's part of your application package. The first things we'll highlight are the items identified in the summary data sheet, which is completed by all applicants. Specifically, 3 items we'd like to discuss are the nonprofit organization requirement, the single audit response, and the IRS 3-step safe harbor procedure. So if you're an eligible victim service provider or nonprofit organization to receive funding under this program, you're required to submit a determination letter from the IRS recognizing your tax-exempt status. OVW cannot make an award to any nonprofit organization that does not submit a 501c3 determination letter. We highlight this specifically because applicants are not including this as part of their application, and this further delays our review. So please ensure that this document is included if it's applicable. OVW requests that all applicants provide a statement as to whether they have expended $750,000 or more in federal funds during their last fiscal year. If they have, then they indicate that on the summary data sheet and also specify the end date of their last fiscal year. However, we're finding that not all applicants always include this information, and they leave out whether or not they've met the threshold or the end date of the last fiscal year gets left off. So please ensure that this question is answered in its entirety in the summary data sheet. So another item we'd like to highlight from the solicitation is specifically for nonprofit organizations. If you use the IRS 3-step safe harbor procedure to determine your executive's compensation, you must reference the additional information section that provides the required disclosure letter. We'd like to highlight that there are 4 parts of this disclosure letter that must be provided to OVW in order to comply with this requirement. The sample letter outlines all 4 parts of the disclosure, so please be sure to follow the sample and provide a response to each of the 4 pieces. The next item we'd like to discuss are the financial accounting practices and this assists us during the pre-award risk assessment review for all applications. Each applicant must prepare a response to all 10 questions, and each question has multiple parts. So we've noticed from prior years that applicants don't always fully answer all parts of each of the questions, which in turn requires us to reach out to the applicant, which then delays recommendations. Some of the most common issues that we've encountered have been, for example, in question number 2, where the applicant indicates that they do indeed have internal policies and procedures, but then they don't also provide a brief list of topics that they cover in those policies and procedures. So that's a multiple part question, and one part might get left off. Another example of an incomplete response includes question number 3, where the applicant doesn't provide the brief list of the summary of the organization's process for tracking expenditures, and more specifically, whether or not it tracks budgeted versus actual expenditures. So they might just say, oh yes, we have a process in place for tracking expenditures, but then they don't go on to explain how they track budgeted versus actual expenditures. So these are just a few examples, but basically, please just make sure you read through each part of each question and provide a full and comprehensive response. So these are just some resources that we have available, and they highlight various aspects that we feel might be helpful during your application process. The first one on the list is the Creating a Budget webinar, and it was a webinar that we recently created for our applicants to hopefully mitigate any challenges that you might face when you are creating your budget and make it clear what we review when we look through your budget. So this webinar will hopefully provide beneficial for you. So when you click on the link at the top of the slide, it will take you to a list of resources for applicants. The first section is titled Budget Information, and it has multiple links below it, and one of them is including this webinar, the Creating a Budget one, and another link also is for the Sample Budget Detail Worksheet. So you're going to use those in conjunction with each other. So when you watch the webinar, make sure that you also have a copy of the Sample Budget Detail Worksheet so you can go through that as well. We pull a lot of examples from that sample while we go through the webinar. Next up on this list is the Uniform Guidance, which can be found at 2 CFR 200. Then another resource is the DOJ Financial Guide, as well as the program-specific solicitation. So if you need assistance finding these resources, please feel free to contact our help desk. Which brings me to the last slide with our contact information. We know this can be a lot of information to process, so if you have any questions specifically about the financial information that we just discussed, please feel free to contact the GFMD help desk at 888-514-8556 or send us an email at ovw.gfmd@usdoj.gov. Thank you, sir.
Thank you, Sohaila. Okay. The Memorandum of Understanding, or MOU, Letters of Support. The MOU is a document containing the terms of the partnership and the roles and responsibilities between two or more parties. The MOU must be a single document and must be signed and dated by the authorized representative of each proposed partner organization during the development of the application. An MOU can include multiple signature pages so long as each page includes the names and titles of all signatories to the MOU. MOUs missing signatures may result in a point deduction or removal from consideration, particularly if the MOU is missing the signature of a required partner. Additional required information. The following forms will be generated and completed during the application submission process. The application for federal assistance, or the SF-424, the standard assurances and certifications regarding lobbying, debarment, suspension, and other responsibility matters, and drug-free workspace requirements, which is Form 4061/6. The applicant financial capability questionnaire, only if applicable, the confidentiality notice form, the disclosure of process related to executive compensation, the pre-award risk assessment, the indirect cost rate agreement, only if applicable, and the letter of non-supplanting. Registration and submission. Every applicant must obtain a Data Universal Number System, or DUNS number, and register online with System for Award Management, or SAM, well before the grant deadline. There is a reason that we set a deadline of January 13th, 2020, as the process to register for DUNS and SAMs is extremely lengthy. If you do not have a DUNS number and are not current in the SAM system, you should begin this process as soon as possible. Register at grants.gov as soon as possible if you haven't already done so. The registration process is not one that can be completed quickly. It takes time, days, and you should begin this process as soon as possible. I can't stress this enough. Every year, we have a handful of applicants that didn't make the deadline because they were delinquent with their SAM and or grants.gov registrations. All applications will be submitted through grants.gov. If you need any assistance, you can go to the grants.gov applicant support hotline at 1-800-518-4726. Submission deadlines. Please pay attention. These are extremely important. Applications are due by 11:59 p.m. Eastern Time on Monday, January 27th, 2020. Applicants are strongly encouraged to begin the application submission process at least 48 hours before the application deadline. Please pay attention to that, at least 48 hours before the application deadline. It's extremely important. What we find is when applicants try to submit an application the day the application is due, 9 times out of 10, they run into some type of technical difficulty. And OVW staff, they're not available 24 hours a day. So that's why it's important that you begin the application submission process at least 48 hours before the application deadline. And as a reminder, applicants must obtain a DUNS number, register online with the SAM system, and grants.gov. Letters of intent are optional, but should be submitted no later than January 13th. The OVW policy on duplicate applications. Applicants should only submit one application per program. If an applicant submits multiple versions of an application, OVW will review the most recent submitted version. OVW policy on late submissions. OVW offers several options for an applicant to provide advance notice of a delayed application. An applicant's request to submit an application after the deadline will be considered by OVW if all of the steps are followed. These steps are listed on pages 20 through 22 of the solicitation. Only in rare circumstances are extensions granted. Failure to begin the registration or application submission process in sufficient time is not an acceptable reason for a late application submission. Application review information. All applications will be subjected to a peer review and a programmatic review. Applications will be scored based on the degree to which the application responds to each section and addresses each element in the section. Applications will be scored based upon the quality of the response, capacity of the applicant, and any partners and the level of detail provided. Each element must be addressed in the section in which it is requested. Points may be deducted if the applicant does not include the information in the appropriate section, even if it is included elsewhere within the application. If we ask you for information about who the key project partners are going to be, that's where it needs to be listed in that particular section per the solicitation. Each section will be reviewed as a separate document and will be scored as such. Federal Award Administration Information, Federal Award Notices. Successful applications will receive OBW award notifications electronically from the OJP Grants Management System, GMS, not grants.gov. The award notification will be sent to the individuals listed as the authorized representative and the point of contact on the SF 424 and will include instructions on accepting the award. The award acceptance process involves physical signature of the award document and terms and conditions by the authorized representative and the scanning of the fully executed award document to OBW. The application checklist. Please use the application checklist that's on page 28 of the solicitation. You want to make sure that you address all the criteria that will be rated. You want to make sure that you include each of the required documents, the project narrative, the budget detail worksheet and narrative, the memorandum of understanding or letter of support, the delivery of legal assistance certification letter, if applicable, and the rural eligibility documentation. These documents must be included in your application packet. Did you review the deadline? January 27, 2020 is the deadline to submit your application. And please submit your application on time. Please make sure your point of contact, or POC, is listed in grants.gov and is responsive to emails and alerts after your application submission. Here are a few helpful hints. Please, 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 I can't stress this enough, please read the entire solicitation before you apply. You want to start preparing your application early on. Please attend to any technical details. Please use headings to identify each section. I can't stress that enough. It makes for a much easier read. When you don't use headings, everything kind of morphs together, and it makes it extremely difficult to understand what your proposal is about. So please use headings to identify each section. Please keep your audience in mind. Be organized and logical. Identify the problem to be addressed. Print out your final documents and carefully proofread and review your application to ensure accuracy and completion. Be careful in the use of attachments. And please limit the use of acronyms. And the points of contact must monitor their inbox for messages from grants.gov. Contact information. If you have any questions or concerns, please get a hold of the Rural Unit at area code 202-307-6026 and ask for a member of the Rural Unit. Or you can send your questions to the OBW Rural email box at obw.rural@usdoj.gov. Thank you so much for listening to the FY 2020 Rural Pre-Application Listening Session, and good luck to each and every one of you during your application process. Thank you.